You are now within seconds of horror because we are going to be looking at and talking about creepy videos on the internet. And as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Yesterday I made a community post asking you all what type of mysterious content would you like to see, and 45% of you had chosen the paranormal. Now make no mistake about it, we will be talking about all types of mysterious content, whether it's glitches in reality, strange disappearances, cryptids, and so forth. But one type of content I really do enjoy talking about happens to be just that, the paranormal. Now, all these can pretty much be considered paranormal content, but when I think of paranormal, I'm talking about ghosts, hauntings, and things like that. With that being said, there was a story that I spoke about on Minutes of Horror that I quickly deleted because I felt like it really didn't mix well with the theme and the vibe of the channel. It is a story you really do not hear many people talk about today, but I feel like it's one of the better examples that prove ghosts and hauntings are real. Because you really have to ask yourself, how does a man who has everything to live for just one day out of the blue suddenly give up his wife, his children, his good paying job, and his freedom, all because of a ghost, all because of the paranormal? We are going to be looking at the haunting of Jose Ferreira. This all started in 1982. Carrie Ann Jopek was your typical young girl living in a well-to-do community in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she attended middle school. Carrie Ann was mostly known as your typical good-natured, free-spirited teenager, but she was also known to be a bit headstrong and rebellious. And on March 16, 1982, this would get her in a bit of trouble when the then 13-year-old Carrie Ann was suspended from school for defying a teacher and skipping classes. Due to her behavior, the school decided to send her home. Her house was only a short distance away, but Carrie Ann decided to go to a friend's house instead to attend a house party. So in the meantime, her mother and her stepfather waited for her to come home. But unfortunately, Carrie Ann would never make it, and she would become the center of a very strange unsolved mystery. As the hours passed, Carrie Ann still had not come home. Her parents did not think much of it because they knew Carrie Ann and they knew she was rebellious and they thought she was just defying curfew. But as morning came and she still had not made it home, that's when they began to show concern and started to worry. Her mother, Carolyn, decided to go to the house across the street where the party was taking place and asked had anybody seen Carrie Ann. Her friend did confirm she was at the party, but after the night had ended, she decided to go home. Carrie Ann's friend knew nothing else about her whereabouts. In turn, Carolyn, she took to the streets, she spoke to Carrie Ann's different friends, she spoke to neighbors, but nothing turned up. Nobody knew where Carrie Ann could be. With still no sight of Carrie Ann that day, she was reported as a missing person. Police, they did not take it very seriously because they just thought Carrie Ann was a young, defiant teenager who had just been suspended from school. So they just took this as a teenager who was having a tantrum, or at worst, she ran away from home due to her bad behavior. And considering the fact they live in a safe suburban neighborhood, foul play was the furthest thing on anybody's mind. But Carrie Ann's parents, who knew her well, did not agree, and they felt like something was off about this whole thing. And as weeks turned into months and still no signs of Carrie Ann, their hope faded that they would ever see their daughter alive again. Police eventually took things more seriously and started to deeply investigate the case. They sent out countless flyers with the missing girl's photo, but there were no new leads, no evidence of what happened, absolutely nothing. With no clues and no new information to work with, police were increasingly suspecting that foul play was indeed involved, and they began to question several persons of interest, one of them being her biological father, Fred, who lived a short distance away and was known for not getting along with Carrie Ann or her mother, Carolyn. What was even more suspicious is that he just poured out a new concrete deck in his yard, but he was eventually dropped as a suspect because he produced a solid alibi. Police had also questioned an individual named Johnny Matt, who is the older brother of the homeowner where the party was taking place, and according to friends, Johnny had become upset that Carrie Ann had been turning down his advances, and on top of this, he was known as a troublemaker, selling drugs and alcohol to underage children. However, police could not connect anything back to Johnny. They could not link him to Carrie Ann's disappearance, so they dropped him as a suspect. 17 months went by with no break in the case, but a grisly discovery would be made in August of 1983. A contractor was working on the back porch of a neighboring house when he struck something hard. Now, as the contractor continued to strike and clear away debris, what would be revealed was a badly decomposed body buried there under the porch of the house. Detectives and investigators were able to determine that this was indeed the long missing Carrie Ann, still wearing the clothes she had disappeared in when she left school that day. The cause of her passing was determined to be severe head trauma and a broken neck. Although it was now obvious that she had her life ended, no one had a clue who could be the culprit, or why anybody would want to end this 13-year-old's life. Once again, Johnny was met with questions as it was his porch, but still, investigators could not find any solid evidence that he had any connections to Carrie Ann's passing. After all this time had passed by, a new lead had eventually came in, when someone reported that a 17-year-old neighbor boy by the name of Jose Ferreira had been seen standing by Carrie Ann's burial spot, crying. After police had taken Jose in, questioning him, they were confident that he was just a friend shaken up by her passing and he was just paying his respects. With no new leads, this would pretty much be the end of the case, and for decades, the crime against Carrie Ann was never any closer to getting solved. However, all that would change in October of 2015 when a strange call came into the Milwaukee news station WISN 12. On the other end of the line was a man who claimed that he was the one who ended Carrie Ann Jopek's life, and he wanted to make a full confession.
The case went cold until earlier this month when Ferreira made a series of phone calls, including one right here to the 12 newsroom, admitting his involvement in Jopek's death.
Does this confession mean anything to you?
Yes, absolutely. God hears his confession.
Lori Vincent is a family friend and says they've been waiting for this day in court for 33 years.
So yes, it turns out that the 17-year-old boy who police questioned decades ago was the one confessing to have ended Carrie Ann Jopek's life 33 years later. But why now? Why would he just suddenly confess? I mean, if you take a look at him in the courtroom, it looks like he had not slept a day, but again, like I said in the beginning of the video, he had an entire life after that incident. He had a wife, kids, a job, yet out of nowhere, he just suddenly gave it all up when he could have confessed years ago. There was never any real suspicion leveled at him, and he could have lived out the rest of his life with nobody knowing the wiser. So again, the question happens to be, why the sudden change of heart? Well, it turns out, after speaking to a behavioral health therapist, Jose was being relentlessly haunted by Carrie Ann's ghost. He felt like he was being tormented. Jose would recall many nights lying in bed trying to fall asleep, getting sleep paralysis, and standing right there at the end of his bed would be Carrie Ann staring at him, with her head on her shoulder, her neck crooked, her mouth wide open with all these strange sounds coming out of her mouth, which sound like a mixture of moaning and gurgling. He would notice all these strange scratches on his body, hearing voices when nobody else was around, seeing shadows out of the corner of his eyes. When he was able to get any sleep, his nightmares would increasingly get worse, dreaming of Carrie Ann and her body buried under the porch. When he had thought he had woken up in his bed with his wife next to him, in reality, he was still dreaming, and holding on to him was Carrie Ann, looking disfigured, staring at him, breathing on his neck. He could feel the coldness of her breath pressing against his neck, and when he turned his head to look at her, again, all he saw was her mouth wide open, her eyes staring at him, and making these sounds that he cannot replicate. Even when Jose was not dreaming, he could still feel Carrie Ann around him. He could feel her presence. He had noticed very strange things going on inside his home. His work life, his family life, the quality had just declined. All Jose could do was think about Carrie Ann and how he was being tormented. But at the end of the day, there was no rest to be had because there was no justice. After making his full confession and going under questioning, Ferreira went into gruesome detail on what transpired all the way back in 1982. He claimed that he was at the party that Carrie Ann had gone to and that everyone had been drinking and getting rowdy. At some point, Jose decided to take the very drunk Carrie Ann downstairs into the basement to make out with her, but she had second thoughts, saying she wanted to save herself for marriage. She decided to go up the stairs and back to where the party was taking place. This is when Jose grabbed onto her and pushed her down the stairs. With Carrie Ann lying there very still on the floor, Jose thought she had just knocked herself out, and he took the chance to grope her, not realizing that she had actually broken her neck. When he realized what he had done and that Carrie Ann was no longer alive, he panicked. Dragging her body through the basement to an exterior cellar door outside, he buried her body in a shallow grave under the porch where the house party was taking place. Not too long after, this is when he said he would see Carrie Ann's apparition screaming at him, yelling at him, and blaming him for what he had done. With the sightings and the dreams continuing to get worse, Ferreira would actually plead and cry to the judge, saying that he wanted to be found guilty. The problem happened to be, with so much time passing, there was no absolute concrete evidence, and they still had to prove that Jose Ferreira was guilty, whether he confessed or not. But with Ferreira pleading guilty and his very detailed confession, they were able to find him guilty, sentencing him to 7 years in prison for assault and false imprisonment. Ever since his confession and being found guilty, Jose Ferreira says he's no longer tormented by Carrie Ann Jopek's ghost, and he can finally sleep peacefully. But the thing is, Carrie Ann Jopek's mother has still faced many sleepless nights, blaming herself for what happened that day. Please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow. Once again, thank you so much for your support.